There is one vice of which no man in the world is free, which everyone in the world loathes when he sees it in someone else, and of which hardly any people, except Christians, ever imagine that they are guilty themselves. There is no fault which makes a man more unpopular, and no fault which we are more unconscious of in ourselves. And the more we have it in ourselves, the more we dislike it in others. Any guesses of what C.S. Lewis is talking about? It's pride. C.S. Lewis is talking about pride, about how it's so easy to look at someone else and to see how they live a life of pride, but it's so hard to see it in yourself. Wouldn't you agree? It's easy to see someone proud on television. Maybe it's an athlete, a linebacker who pumps his chest after he gets that big tackle. Maybe it's in a post-game interview where somebody says, "I'm the best athlete in the world." It's easy to see pride in someone else like that. It's easy to see pride in your spouse, in your friends, in your coworkers, in your teacher, in your boss. It's easy to see pride in other people, but it's hard to point the finger at yourself when it comes to pride. Wouldn't you agree? And the more proud you become, the more you hate it in other people, is what C.S. Lewis is talking about. And that's what makes it so tricky. I've never had someone come up to me and said, "Pastor Tom, we got to talk. I'm really struggling with the sin of pride." No one says that. No one will raise their hand and say, "I'm a very proud person." No one says that. But it's something at every level that each person of us struggles with. We all struggle with the sin of pride, even if we don't know it. And to help us with this today, we are currently studying Esther chapter 5, 6, and 7. And I'll be preaching through different sections of that text. And we are looking at a man named Haman. The story of Esther is about how God led a young Jewish girl named Esther to become the queen of Persia. And Haman, he's the bad guy. He's the antagonist of this story. In last sermon, we heard that he passed a law planning to exterminate all the Jews. He wanted to kill them all off. He's the bad guy in the story. And he's very openly proud. So tonight, we are going to examine Haman's pride. And yes, we're going to point our finger at him and to look at the pride that he commits. But the whole point of that, as we look at Haman's pride, we have to point the finger at ourselves as well. So let's jump into that story now of Haman and his pride. Haman went out that day happy and in high spirits, but when he saw Mordecai at the king's gate and observed that he neither rose nor showed fear in his presence, he was filled with rage against Mordecai. Do you see how pride can change your mood? Here's Haman, happy as can be, happy as a clam, walking around, happy of his life that he has. He works in the palace. He's one of the most powerful people in the kingdom. He has the wealth. He has the life. But then that all changes. When Haman saw Mordecai, his arch nemesis, he was no longer happy as a clam. He was now down in the dumps, because Mordecai refused to show him honor. Everyone else would bow down to Haman and show him that respect, but not Mordecai. Mordecai hated Haman, and whenever Haman saw Mordecai not bowing down to him, not showing him honor, that just ruined his entire day. Calling together his friends and Zeresh his wife, Haman boasted to them about his vast wealth, his many sons, and all the ways the king had honored him. And that's not all, Haman added. I'm the only person Queen Esther invited to accompany the king to the banquet she gave, but all this gives me no satisfaction as long as I see that Jew Mordecai sitting at the king's gate. So like I said, this guy's proud, and he has a party. He has his wife over, he has his friends over, and he says to them, "Guys, I've got it all. I have the life, I have the prestige, I have the family, I have the clout, I have the money, I have the life. Even the queen invited me to a VIP banquet, and I'm the VIP. I'm the only person going. It's great. I get to go to this big party at the king's palace. But I have no satisfaction in any of that because of that Jew, Mordecai. Do you see how pride changes his mood? He can't enjoy his life because one person doesn't like him. And that leads to our first point for today that we learn about pride. Pride seeks the approval of others. At the heart of pride is self-absorption, caring so much about yourself. And if you convince yourself that you're the center of the universe, that life revolves around you, well then, you would like other people to acknowledge that. To maintain your image, other people need to like you, say good things about you. And when that doesn't happen, your ego is crushed. And you might think in this story, I mean, come on, what's wrong with Haman? He has such a good life, but just one person ruins his entire day. So many people like him, so many people are honoring him, but one person isn't, and that ruins his entire day? Sounds nuts. But I can relate to that. And I bet you can too. We're having one bad comment, one criticism ruin your entire day. I think I told some of you this story before, but a couple years ago, I was a guest preacher at a small church in Colorado. And there was, like I said, small church, maybe 50 people showed up that Sunday. And I did the sermon, I led the worship service, and afterwards, I went in the back and I started shaking hands with people. And so many people said nice things to me. Oh, thank you so much for coming here. Your sermon was so great. Thank you for leading our worship. That kind of thing. And then I had one larger, older man come up to me, and he grabbed my hand really hard and said, "Don't ever say that thing again." And he critiqued me on something I said during my sermon that he didn't like. He thought it was false doctrine. It wasn't, but that's what he thought. And he squeezed my hand really hard, and then he walked out the door. So, that day, I had 49 people say nice things to me, and one criticism. What comment do you think I thought about later that day? Do you think it was the 49 positive messages I heard, or the one criticism? It's so easy to focus on when one person doesn't like you. It's so easy to have your ego hurt when one person criticizes you, to care about the approval of other people. But that's what pride does. Pride seeks the approval of others. So, Haman, he came up with a plan. His wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, "Have a pole set up, reaching to a height of 50 cubits, and ask the king in the morning to have Mordecai impaled on it. Then go with the king to the banquet and enjoy yourself." A little extreme, huh? You know, Haman, he has one guy who doesn't like him, Mordecai. And he's like, it's so hard just having this one guy that doesn't like me. And his wife says, "Here's what you should do. Just kill him. Kill him off. Impale him on a pole. Go ask the king if you can impale him on a pole. And then after he's dead, you can go to your party and enjoy the rest of your day." That's the plan that they come up with. That's the plan that they come up with, is that they don't like Mordecai, so they just decide, let's kill him. And that leads to our second point. Pride makes others the competition. If you live a life of pride, instead of seeing others as fellow redeemed children of God, you are going to look at others as the competition. Instead of loving the people around you, you are just going to try and have a better life than the people around you. God gives you a good life, but you can't enjoy it because somebody has a better life. God gives you a house, but you can't enjoy it because someone else has a better house. God gives you a career, but you can't enjoy it because God gives someone else a better career. God gives you talents, but you can't enjoy it because someone else has even more talent. God gives you a life, but you can't enjoy it because somebody has a better life. That's what pride does. It prevents you from enjoying your own life. It prevents you from enjoying other people because it turns others into the competition. And Haman, he takes it to the extreme. He literally tries to kill the person that he's jealous of, Mordecai. He tries to get him impaled on a pole. And we might not do that. I hope not. I hope you haven't tried to get anyone put to death this last week. But when we get jealous of other people, it's easy for us to try and harm them. Maybe not physically, but I bet there have been people in your life that you've been jealous of, that you started a rumor about, or you gossip behind their back. Or maybe you just harbor those thoughts in your heart, and you hold on to them, and you keep a close eye on that person, and you wish God would take away all their possessions or their talents or whatever it might be. That's what pride does. It warps our hearts to see other people as a competition, to not wish well upon them, but want them to lose what they have. Because pride tells us that I need to be the center of the universe. I need to be the one that's getting all the blessings. That night, the king could not sleep. So he ordered the book of the Chronicles, the record of his reign, to be brought in and read to him. It was found recorded there that Mordecai had exposed Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's officers who had conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. So we've been talking about in this sermon series called Divine Coincidences, how God often works with coincidences. How God often just lines up events in order that they should be to carry out his plan. And in this verse alone, I see about 3 things going on that just happen to be a coincidence that God uses. The king just happened to not be able to sleep one night. Just one night, the king, for whatever reason, just can't sleep. And he so just happens to have a servant come in and say, hey, can you read to me from the Chronicles? And it just so happens that that one servant opens up right to the page that reminds the king about how Mordecai saved his life. Can you imagine that? Do you see how crazy it is? I kind of picture it like, imagine one night I can't sleep as a pastor, and I roll over to my wife and I nudge her and say, hey babe, can you go find Holy Trinity's council minutes from 2016 and start reading there? That's a good way for me to get slapped in the middle of the night, right? But that's what happened. You know, the king just happened to read these chronicles, and it just so happened that he was reminded that Mordecai saved his life. And then the king asked, did we ever honor that guy, Mordecai? Did we ever do anything for him? And the servant said, no, we didn't do anything for him. We didn't honor him. We didn't reward him in any way. So the king thought to himself, I better reward that guy. And right when the king had that thought, in walks Haman. In walks Haman into the palace. He was going to walk right up to the king and ask him to put Mordecai to death, right while the king was planning to reward Mordecai. So Haman walks in, and the king says, hey Haman, what do you think I would do? What would be a good way to honor somebody in my kingdom? What would be a good way to show honor and respect to somebody? And this is how proud Haman is. Now Haman thought to himself, who is there that the king would rather honor than me? Oh, of course, the king wants to honor me. Why would he not want to honor me? So he thinks to himself, well, what should I ask? Here's king, here's what you should do. Throw a parade. Get a parade going. Let's get a parade and honor this one guy, maybe me. Let's get this parade going. You should get him the king's robe, so I want to wear a robe. Get the king's horse, and just put this guy on a horse and parade him around the city and have everybody chant his praises. That's what Haman comes up with. And then the king says, all right, go ahead and do that for Mordecai. And Haman is shocked. He can't believe it. He has to do this for his arch nemesis. He needs to honor the guy who he hates, the guy who he was just about to ask the king to be put to death. But whatever the king asks has to be done. So, Haman does it. He gets the king's robe, he gets the king's horse, and he parades Mordecai around through the city, everyone chanting his praises, and Haman goes home and weeps and weeps and weeps. And that leads to our third point. Pride demands all good things. Pride demands all good things. That's what pride does. It says, oh, you're going to honor somebody? Well then, you better honor me. You better honor me if you are going to honor somebody. And it's this idea of being self-centered, thinking that you deserve everything in life. But that leads to our final point as well. Pride leads to destruction. Then Queen Esther answered, "If I have found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my petition, and spare my people. This is my request. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated." So during this banquet, Queen Esther goes up to the king and says, there's this plot out there. Do you know about this plot? That there's somebody out there trying to kill all of my people, the Jews. And the king, he's surprised. He's like, what? There's somebody out there trying to kill all the Jews? So King Xerxes asked Queen Esther, who is he? Where is he? The man who has dared to do such a thing. And Esther said, an adversary, an enemy, this vile Haman. She points at him. And that's when Haman knew that something bad was going to happen. And he begs for his life. He begs Esther for his life to spare him from passing this law. But you know what the king says? The king said, impale him on it. So they impaled Haman on the pole he had set up for Mordecai. Haman set up this pole that he wanted to use to have Mordecai killed, but instead the king used it to kill him. Pride leads to destruction. We see that play out quite literally in this story, don't we? We see a man who is proud and is led to destruction. We have a phrase that we like to use, that pride comes before the fall. Well, you see a guy who was proud, and we see how it ended up to him, how he was impaled on a pole for all to see, for all to look at and to learn a lesson from. That pride leads to destruction. And you know this. You know that pride leads to destruction. I'm sure you've seen this played out in our life. Do you want to have a bad marriage? Then be very proud. Be very self-absorbed. Do you want to be a bad teammate? Well, then be very proud. Do you want to be a bad coworker? Do you want to be a bad employee or employer? Do you want to be bad in relationships? Do you want to be a bad friend? Then be proud. Self-absorption hurts other people, and often it leads to destruction. It leads to the destruction of marriages and friendships and teams and office places. Pride leads to destruction. But that's also true in the spiritual world. That pride leads to destruction. And that's why spiritual pride is so dangerous. Spiritual pride is this attitude that I don't need God. I'm pretty good on my own. I'm a pretty good person. I can get to heaven myself. That's the danger of spiritual pride. And God says if you have that attitude of spiritual pride, then that you don't need God in your life, God would have every right to send you to hell for that. God would have every right to do so, to send you to hell because you are too proud and you say that you don't need God. And we see that play out in the story. We see how pride leads to destruction. And we should be terrified when we see Haman on that pole. When we look at Haman on that pole, we learn a lesson that God takes pride seriously, and that's what we deserve. When we see Haman on that pole, we see how pride leads to destruction. And we see that's how God handles pride. But you know what? You know what I learned? That some people, many historians agree, that the Persians were the people who invented crucifixion as well. See, they got so good at impaling people to poles, that was their main way how they would kill somebody. But they also then began to dabble with killing people in other ways, and instead of impaling someone on a pole, they think that they were the inventors of nailing people to a pole. And that's how crucifixion came to be. And they passed this idea over to the Romans, and the Romans, they were the ones who perfected it. The Persians were the inventors of crucifixion, but the Romans, they were the ones who perfected it. And that became the new, most humiliating way how to kill someone. And that leads to our final point. Jesus humbled himself to save the proud. When we look at our own sin, when we look at Haman's pole, when we look at pride's pole, we see how it leads to destruction. But if you need to see God's love, if you want to see God's love, then instead of looking at Haman's pole, you need to look at Jesus on a cross. How Jesus lived a perfect life. How he didn't have a single proud bone in his body. How he died the most humiliating way there was to die back then, by dying on a cross. And how he did that for you and me. Jesus had everything. He's God, the creator of the universe, who was in heaven. And he gave that all up to be born into this world. And he was born in this world, took on flesh, just so that he could have that flesh nailed to a cross. So if you want to see what sin causes, you need to look at pride's pole. You need to see what happened to Haman. But if you want to see God's love, you need to see Jesus on the cross. You need to see what Jesus has done for you. How he's forgiven you for every time you've been proud, for every selfish motive, for every ounce of arrogance in your body. Jesus forgives you. He took it away on the cross. Jesus humbled himself to save proud people like you and me. That's the Savior that we have. And knowing that Jesus saved us through that, well, it's going to change the way how we live our life. It's going to change the way how we see things. It's going to change the way how we see our possessions. Instead of saying, I'm proud and I deserve every single good thing in my life, knowing what Jesus has done for us, that will lead us to say, every single thing I have in this life is a gift from God. Every single thing. I don't earn or deserve anything. But if I have a family, if I have a house, if I have any possessions, those are gifts from God. And knowing that Jesus saved us, that's going to change the way how we see other people. Instead of being proud and seeing others as a competition who we try and get ahead of in life, we will see other people as fellow redeemed children of God. And we'll be happy for them when they're successful. We'll be happy for them when they're talented. We'll say, thank God that God blessed them with those talents, instead of saying, why didn't God bless me that way? And knowing that Jesus saved us, that's going to change your life. Instead of saying, this world revolves around me, and I'm going to live my life to get the most happiness in this world, instead we'll say, I will live my life to serve Jesus. Because we have Jesus who humbled himself to save the proud. And we are forgiven in his name. We do this all in the name of Jesus. Amen. Please stand.